brave girl, how you do the things that you do.
This is the bottom line. There is no coming of man ritual in our culture. I wish we could have him go walk on hot coals, pee on a rock, kill the fatted calf, let's have a party, you're a man. We don't have that. What we do have in our culture is don't be a mama's boy. And our sons start pushing us away. You'll know when it's happening. They'll start smelling funky. They'll start having an attitude. That floor that they swept for however long, all of a sudden it's beneath them. And you're trying to define that as rebellion. But if we understand men, they crave respect. And when they work, they want to do something that earns respect, that they can respect themselves for, that other men will respect them for, that we will respect them for. And honestly, you and I know that floor is going to need swept again tomorrow. We just do it. Or if you're like me, you let the dog in and they clean up all that stuff. But when your son starts saying, oh, I don't want to do it, we have to recognize the signs. They're wanting to be a man. So I always tell moms, either you hand your son his manhood or he will fight you for it. So that's what Moms Raising Sons talks about. From the time they're 1 and 2 little guys, how we set the stage so that when they reach that season of their life, I always say that the difference between a toddler and a teen is diaper rash and acne. Whatever we don't establish when they're little, it's going to visit us when they're adolescents. So if we're not teaching them to respect us, if we're not teaching them to be kind, that's going to come back. And boy, the arguments that your adolescent has are far more painful because they know what to say to get your heart, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I do.
You know, I remember with my son, I have a 14-year-old, and I remember, I don't know why, it was one of those mom instinct nights. He used to, when he was a child, when he was a boy, he loved for me every night to, when it was time for bedtime, to come and crawl into the bed with him and rub my fingers down his back like this, you know, just kind of up and down. And he would just lay there and we would talk and I would just stroke my fingers down his back and until he fell asleep. And it was a very special thing that I had with my son. And I remember one night, he was 11 years old, and he called me into his room to tuck him in. And I remember, I just knew it in my heart. I got into that bed and I started stroking his back, and I'm like, this is the last time that he's gonna call me into the room. I just knew it, I could feel it. So I'm so thankful that I did, because I was right. It was the last time. I don't know, God, instinct, whatever, I don't know what it was and how I knew. But when I was stroking his back that night, knowing it was my last time, I just breathed in the smell of his hair and, you know, the back of his neck and just embraced it. And it's been such a wonderful memory for me, because that was, I think, that last like real precious mommy-son moment that I got to have with him. And we've had different ones since then, but they just look different. You know, they look different. And
we're all crying. Oh my gosh, you're right. The auditorium was filled with crying women.
You see. Okay, so I have some amazing stories to connect all that you just said, Teresa.
Okay, please share.
So my son, Brandon, we had moved to Austin, Texas. We planted a church there. We met in our home, 200 teenagers in our house every Wednesday night. And these kids were coming to Christ. They'd grown up in the Bible Belt. They didn't understand who Jesus really was. They just knew about the religion of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And while that was happening, my son developed seizures, severe epilepsy. Mm-hmm. He had a seizure. It was 28 minutes long. Steve was in California still. I was in Texas by myself. The helicopter came, the police came, they life flighted him to the hospital. He had a 28-minute seizure. Wow. Yes. And so when we got to the hospital, they did EEGs on his little brain. They glue these little things to their head and they're was trying to do a sleep study. They had him sleep at one point. And this is the interesting part. When he fell asleep, 6 years old, adorable little guy, I went over and I gave him a little kiss on his temple. And the tech called me over. And now this is in the olden days, in the 1900s, when it wasn't digital. It was actually reading out on a piece of paper. And she took her marker and she circled and she wrote, "Mom's kiss." We're all going to cry again. She said, "He knows you kissed him when he was sleeping." Aww. Isn't that precious?
That is precious.
And so I want you to know, when my kids reach junior high, all of them, my daughters, my sons, and they start like, come on, Mom. I would go in and kiss them on their temple at night when they were sleeping. And I would tell them in their little ears, "I love you. Mommy loves you so much." I kind of brainwashed them while they were unconscious. You love mommy.
Mommy.
But when Brandon was older, I would give him a back scratch because no one will resist a back scratch. And I'm not talking about laying in the bed next to him and snuggles like that, Teresa, but just scratching his back. And I always did that. That's how, even with my adolescent daughters, that's how I would connect with them or tickle their arms. So after Brandon got married, I remember they came to visit, and he's married to a precious woman. In fact, they're expecting their 4th child. And they weren't married for too long. And he came to visit, and then he said, you know, Mama, you can still scratch my back. And I'm like, okay, because you're trying to find your place as the mom of the son who's married now. And I was really blessed that he said that, because if he wouldn't have said it, I would have been like, that's her place now. And then I have to tell one more story that connects all these dots. In Moms Raising Sons to Be Men, I tell the story about Brandon. When he was in kindergarten, he was on stage, and it was a Christmas program. He had his little red cardigan sweater, singing his heart out. And I whistle really loud. And we live on a ranch, an 80-acre ranch in the middle of nowhere. So my kids, when they heard Mom's whistle, they knew it was time to come home. And whenever my son would sing or be on stage, any of my kids, I would whistle real loud. And so when he was done with his song, I whistled, and he looked and found me and winked at me. And for all of Brandon's life, as he has been on stages, he's toured with Shane and Matthew West and Casting Crowns. He's just had some awesome opportunities. But whenever I'm at an event or at a church where he's leading worship and there's an applause, I whistle. And he always looks until he finds his mama, and he'll wink at me. Isn't that sweet? So
That's sweet.
there's a woman in Nashville. Brandon and Jesse were living in Nashville, and they were, he was playing in a church. And a woman texted me that she had been reading my book, and she was sitting behind Jesse, Brandon's wife, and she could see the back of Jesse's head, and she could see Brandon on stage. She took a picture and she sent it to me, which, as your kids get older, the glimpses of them are so sweet when they don't live near you. And all she texted me was, he winks at her now.
Oh.
Yeah, right? But that's what we want. We want to launch them into men that transfer their affections from us.
Yeah.
You're raising them for a woman that you want them to love more than they love you. You want them to transfer their conversations that they had with you to that woman. You want to train their brain. You want to teach them how to communicate, how to talk about those things that they're processing, but knowing full well, you're doing this for her. You guys got me crying so much today. You're doing this for her. I talk to moms all the time they feel competitive with their daughter-in-law. They feel rejected by their son, that he doesn't call as often, and he tells her everything he used to tell me. It's like, good. That's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And I would tell Brandon, call me on your drive home from work. Don't call me when you're at home and you need to be with your family. Call me when you're on your way home and you have a few minutes to chat.
Right.
But I don't want to steal you away from those kids clamoring, and she's been taking care of them all day long. So yeah, Moms Raising Sons to Be Men. It takes courage. It's not for the faint of heart. And to hand them over to someone else takes bravery, but it's the right thing to do.
Think of how powerful that is. Like, as a mom, I've never had that thought before, but I think that's so profound, of raising them so that they transfer that to their spouse. Like, if you think about us, like if our mother-in-law had done that for our husbands, which maybe they have,
Or maybe
right?
Or maybe not. Well, yeah, I'm like realizing, oh, that explains a lot. You know, like, so
Yeah.
that's powerful.
Yeah. I think why we're all so emotional, especially when you told your story, Teresa, is like we all have sons, and we're all very, like, we want the best for them. Like, our love is so deep for them that, like, that moment that you were talking about, like, you never want that to leave. And the thought, like, the fact is that is going to happen. Like, there is going to be a last time where you snuggle in bed with them. And that's like, so how do we raise them so that we always have that relationship with them,
Right.
that you can't snuggle in bed with them,
Obviously, right.
but
it
you still
translates
have
into
that
another
relationship where
way,
they call you on their way home from work,
Right.
like Rhonda was just saying, and you still have that relationship that's open with them.
And honestly, ladies, it's our calling that if you have been called to motherhood, there is a ministry of motherhood to which the Lord has called us. And we cannot do it without his wisdom. If he called you to deepest, darkest Africa to go and live in a hut and share the gospel and preach and do all those things that a missionary would do with the zeal and passion, you would wash your mind with the water of the word. You would seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. You would search your heart and ask him to show you your own sins so that you can pray powerfully for these people you're going to minister to.
You'd go all
What
in.
do we do? What do we do when we find out we're pregnant? I want some cute maternity clothes. And I'm going to look on Pinterest for some cute ideas for the nursery. And we want to be the best mom that we can be. But we forget this is a ministry to which God has called us. And it's humbling, and it takes God's courage. It takes his strength and wisdom, and it is a daily battle to stay in a place usable by the master for this amazing calling to be an architect of the next generation, because that's every woman who has poured into her child. These men in scripture, these men in history, their first teachers were not seminary professors. It was their mama. And that is an amazing, noble calling. And you need to surround yourself with other women that understand that we are called to this. It is a ministry, and we need to be warriors on a mountaintop, like Moses interceding for Joshua, who was fighting a battle. When Moses got weary and his arms came down, his buddies lifted his arms up to help him keep interceding so that the battle would be won in the valley. When my kids started to act rebellious, when my kids started to spend time with a boy or a girl that I felt was not a good, boyfriend to girlfriend material, my small circle of woman friends interceded with me on behalf of my child. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous mama accomplishes much. And you surround yourself with some mama warriors like that, and there's no stopping what God's going to do in and through your life and through the life of your kids.
I have a question. I guess my question is, where is the boundary where that connection with your son, and you have that strong connection, where to the point that it does affect the relationship, the marriage, the woman that he's dating, and because of the strong relationship with the mom that they've had growing up, there's a point where they have to cut that relationship. So how does that boundary work?
That's an interesting question. As a mother of a son, we get to learn from women who've walked ahead of us, women who have lived it. That's why I wrote this book, because a lot of women don't have an example to even really follow. My mom was a teen mom, and I was her second child, and she did the best she could. And my mom and I grew up together. I actually led my mom to the Lord 6 months before she passed away. It was pretty cool. But yeah, I didn't have the I'm going to do it like my mom did it example. And let's be honest, there's so much dysfunction in our homes and in our upbringings. We end up focusing more on what we don't want to become than what we want to become. That develops resentment, that develops bitterness, that develops, the Bible says the man thinks in his heart, so is he. When I'm thinking about what I don't want to be like my mom, guess what I'm thinking on? Her character qualities, and I will become that exact thing I don't want to become. So Philippians says, think on what is good, right, honorable, praiseworthy. I want to surround myself with women that have walked the path ahead of me, that are willing to say, hey, this is the regret I have. I held on too tight to my son and he pushed me away. Or this is what I learned when I handed my son over to his manhood, or when I pulled myself out. So the transfer, there's a couple of stories. First of all, David's mom in the Bible. Why don't we know her name? I think the woman should have a shout out. There is no name of David's mama in the Bible, but we'll find that out one day, but come on.
Yeah,
So here's
point.
David, and he's getting ready to fight Goliath. Remember, he was probably 17 years old. And honestly, when God gets a hold of a teenager's heart, he turns the world upside down. And he went, and his brothers were hiding, and he told Saul, I'll fight him right now. And Saul gives him his armor, and he takes it off. And here's the key to what he says to Saul. God gave me victory over a lion and over a bear. I know he will give me victory over this giant. Time out. He was 17. That means as a young teenager, God sent a lion and a bear into his life while he was protecting his father's sheep. Where was his mama? I would have been like, babe, a lion attacked our son today. He don't work for you no more. He's staying home. But
You're staying home today.
Yeah,
For the rest of
every
your
day.
life.
She wasn't a helicopter mom. And then he was sent to the battlefield by his dad to bring lunch and provisions to his brothers. When we protect our sons so well from the big bad wolf, what we might not realize is that God is sending the big bad wolf to prepare them to fight that giant. With my son Brandon's story, I got to tell you, he had severe seizure activity. He was highly medicated. He was stoned. He was on special ed at school, which those words pierced my heart when the school administrator used them. He didn't want to play sports. I was coaching high school cheerleading at the time, which is a cult in and of itself. It's an awesome plot thing, but it's definitely intense.
Robin.
But I expected my little boy to be an athlete, to hit one out of the park, to run one down the field, to hear the crowd glory in my son's accomplishments. That was what I thought my son was going to be. And he didn't want to do any of that. He played Legos. He picked up a guitar and he started, every band member that came to our house would give him pointers on playing their instruments. He could play them all. But I remember going in my room one night after Brandon had a severe seizure because we missed one dose of his medicine he took 3 times a day. And I wept at the foot of my bed and I told God, I'm done. I quit. I'm out of here. Kids are coming to Jesus. We're serving you. You can't heal my boy. I'm done. But here's the secret. Psalm 119 says, God's word I've hid in my heart that I might not sin against him. His word dwells in us richly. That's what speaks to us when we're ready to walk. And I heard in a still small voice, not audible, but it shouted to my heart, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. And I said, no, I can't even imagine how you can make good come of this, but I know you're good and I know your character, and I will say thank you with my lips if you change my heart. And slowly, we started watching Brandon become this amazing musician. My husband, who is also a worship pastor, and he said, I've never met anyone who thinks in music theory like Brandon does. And slowly what we realized was God used Brandon's epilepsy to form him to be a musician. And anybody who knows stoners make good musicians, right? But as Brandon grew up and God gave him all kinds of opportunities, he was able to become not the one I wanted him to be. In fact, God had to get this mom out of the way because I would have raised an arrogant little athlete. But God said, you want to raise him so you can hear the crowd glory in your son's accomplishments. But I'm raising up your son to bring the crowd to glory in my son's accomplishments through worship. Isn't that amazing?
I love it.
God knew the plans he had for my son. But let's stop. I know I've been in ministry for 30 plus years. I know moms that have gotten mad when God didn't heal their child, when God didn't, their husband's a jerk and he left and they're a single mom, or they resent and they get mad at God because he didn't show up for them. And guess what? Your resentment renders your prayers powerless for your children. 10 years later, my daughter Meredith was living and working at the Master's University, her and her husband, and she gave birth to a little girl. We went running into the delivery room. This was after both of my daughters had had a number of miscarriages, and we were so excited to celebrate a baby. And my son-in-law stopped us and said, hang on, something's wrong with Ivy. She has something called golden haar syndrome, and she has facial cranial deformities. She's absolutely adorable and precious, but she's had 5 surgeries in her little lifetime. But we were just like taken aback. And here's the thing I want you to catch from all of this story. My daughter, Meredith, after, things settled, doctor's visits, learning about golden haar, all of those things, I said, how are you doing, honey? And she said, Mama, this isn't my trial. This is Ivy's trial. And we're here to equip her to walk through this trial, trusting the Lord. Wow. Now, what if I'd walked away 10 years earlier when Meredith, who was in junior high or high school, was watching me? What if I had said, God didn't heal my son, I'm done? Because sometimes our trial is not about us. Sometimes it's the lion and the bear to protect your child to fight Goliath. I'm sorry, I'm super tearful today. To fight Goliath when it's their turn.
It's about them watching. Yeah.
Thank you for joining our Brave Conversations.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell notification so that you don't miss our next episode. We're going to have a lot of other amazing guests.
Are you ready for more? Click on the next video for more Brave Conversations.
Have some brave topics you'd like us to discuss? Leave your suggestions below. We'd love to hear from you.
See you next week.
Hey, brave girl.